In our previous lectures, we have created a network DAO, which is going to allow us to take a URI, which is a URL, a web address essentially, and get back a string result. That's where we've ended so far. And the trick is that this string result is a big string. We have to figure out what to do with it. So this is the URI that we're sending in. It is plantplaces.com/perl/mobile/viewplants.json.pl (?) equals maple, or we could change that to Paul, or whatever you wish. And the results that we get back are the plants that have that name, for example, Paul, as their common name. So I could put in apple, I could put in any option here, and we'll see that we get back a list of plants that have that name. So what we need to do in this lecture is figure out what to do with this list. And I'm going to start by looking at a presentation we have. We talked earlier about web services and how we have an XML style that we can use. We also have a JSON style, stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's basically a very compact way to pass data from one machine to another. The only trick is there's not a whole lot of metadata there. What we end up with is a bunch of name-value pairs. So a curly brace indicates a set of name-value pairs. In square brackets indicates a list of values. Okay, kind of like an array list or a vector, as we've used so far in this class, some kind of collection. So what we have to do then is we have to take this big blob of data and figure out how to convert that to a set of populated plant objects. Then we need to take those populated plant objects and put them into an array list. Once we have an array list, we can put them into our list activity, or in other words, our plant results. That's what we want to do. So we need to understand a little bit more about JSON. Luckily, JSON is built into Android. We don't have to do anything special to get it. One moment. Okay, just refocus this on our presentation. Oops, sorry, looking at the wrong box. Okay, there we go. So luckily, JSON's built in. We don't have to go get a special library or anything to use JSON. So to get JSON, what we're going to do is we're going to take this entire string of data that we're getting back as a result when we request this URI. We are going to pass it into a JSON object. Now, from that JSON object, we can get out either an array, like so, or individual name-value pairs, depending on what that JSON looks like. Okay, so here's how we get an array. We're going to walk through this step by step. An array, like an array list, is a collection of data. We're going to run it through an iteration statement or a looping statement to access each row of data one at a time. Okay. And then an object is a collection of these name-value pairs. So we'll look at each of these one at a time. First of all, though, we have to figure out what in the world is the data that we're dealing with. So I'm going to go to, let me take something pretty simple. Let me take common equals redbud. Okay, this redbud that I'm entering here, that's the search term that the users are entering when they go to the search screen. So I put in redbud, and we see something that looks kind of interesting. We have an open curly, which indicates a collection of name-value pairs. We have a name called plants, and that's our name, and then a colon, and the value is what follows that name. The value here, because it's something in square brackets, indicates that it's a collection. Okay, square brackets indicate a collection of similar objects. Within that, each of these open curlies represents an individual plant. And we'll see a very similar pattern. ID 83, ID 1020, ID 125. Each of them have an ID. Each has a genus. Each has a species. So we need to figure out how to parse this data out and get it into a collection. There's one nice way we can look at the data here. If we go to this online JSON viewer, okay, just a moment for this to render. Okay, what you can do here is, this is provided if you look in Blackboard under our weekly modules, you'll see this online JSON viewer. I'm going to paste, whoops, not the let me go get the text that we were looking at. Okay, so I'm going to Control A to select all, Control C to copy. I'm going to go to the online JSON viewer. I'm going to paste this text. Now you see it's a little easier to see here. We have a collection. The collection is named plants. We know that a name is going to be followed by a colon. And then after that, an open square bracket, closed square bracket indicates a collection of data. Open curly, close curly indicates one object within that collection. Then we have a comma, and then another object, and then a comma, and so on and so forth, and that process continues. Okay? But here's the cool thing. This is text. Now if I go to Viewer, what it's actually going to do is it's going to help me break it down. So it's going to show me I have my root JSON. It's going to show me I have a collection of plants. Then it's going to show me for this particular JSON, I have 12 plants, starting with 0 going to 11. If I click a plus to expand, it's going to show me all of the name value pairs within this collection. Okay, there we go. So we see that each of these items, each of these rows within this plant collection has an ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common. Those values will be different, but they will all have ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common, followed by a value. So we need to figure out how to parse this out. It's actually quite straightforward. I'm going to go to Eclipse, and I'm going to go to our plant DAO impl, which is what we built in our last recording, or one of our last recordings actually. And we know what's going to happen is we're going to get back this result on line 26. Now what we need to do is we want to parse this large string into a JSON object. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation, see how we want to do that. For that, it's quite easy. We just use this line right here. We declare a variable of type JSONObject. We can call that whatever we want. We can call it lowercase JSONObject if we want, whatever we wish to call it. We declare a variable on the left, and we have an equal sign. On the right, we create an object, and when we create an object, we have to pass in a parameter. The parameter is this humongous resulting string. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to say JSONObject, or let me call it root equals new JSONObject, and I'm going to pass in result, where result is that big blob of result data. And let me put a comment to that effect. Result is the result of our search as a large JSON formatted string, and save. Okay, I'm getting red lines on JSONObject because I need to import it. A simple Control-Shift-O will fix that. Okay, now when I have root, let me go back and look at that browser. Root is basically this guy right here. So what if we need to get plants? Okay, that's very easy to do again. All we need to do is say root.get JSONArray, and we pass in the name of that collection, which is plants. And that will return to us get the collection, or array if you prefer, of plants. That will return to us the collection of plants. At Control 1, I'm going to say assign to new local variable. Okay, JSONArray, and I'll call this JSON plants. How about that? Okay, this is a collection of plants. And save. Okay, now, here's the trick from here, is that if we look back at the JSON viewer, we know that this collection of plants for a red bud has 12 results. Now, what if I say maple? What if I go in here and I say maple? Okay, Control A, Control C. I'm going to go to the viewer, text, Control A, delete, Control V, viewer. If I have maple, holy smokes, I have a lot more plants. So the number of objects within this collection can vary. Number of objects within this collection can vary. Okay, so we need to have a way that we can go through and touch each of those objects one at a time. what we're going to need is a way to iterate over each of the objects in this collection. Okay? If I look at JSONArray, what we have to do is we have to do what's called a for loop. Okay? We have to do what's called a for loop. A for loop starts with 3 items in parentheses. First is a place where we initialize a variable. Most often that variable is an integer variable, and by convention we oftentimes use the letter I. Next, we say we have to do a comparison. We have to say, I want you to continue to loop while the value in that variable I is less than the number of plants that we have. That's what we call the test. So initialization comes first, and then we have a semicolon, then we have a test, and a semicolon. Finally, we have the increment part. What we're saying is, once this loop completes, I want you to add 1 to the value that's in the variable I. So I++, that's the way we can quickly add 1. In programming, there are a lot of occasions where we're adding 1. So I++ will quickly add 1 to a number. I mean, the plus operator, that's called the post-increment operator. Within this, we're going to use our old-fashioned plant object. You remember this guy? We made this one a while ago. If I Control M, and I go to DTO, and I look at plant. Okay, this is the holder of all of our plant information, and this is the thing that is showing on our list activity when we show results. So we're creating a new plant object, and then what we're going to do is we're also going to get a reference to the plant object that is within our JSON array list, our JSON collection, our JSON array. And then we're simply going to take data from this, the JSON data, and we're going to push it into this plant. After we do that, we take this plant, we add it to our collection of plants that we're going to return, and we're all done. Believe it or not, it's not that much work. We're pretty darn close. We'll take a look at this in just a moment. Okay, so let's take a look. The trickiest part's going to be the for loop. So I'm going to go to plant DAO impl, and I'm going to Control M. Okay, JSON array JSON plants equals root.get JSON array plants. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up my for loop for int I equals 0. Remember, that's our initialization. Next we have our test, I less than JSON plants dot length. Okay, that's our test. We're going to continue to loop while this variable I is less than the number of objects we have in this array. Remember, if it's a maple, we had like 49 objects. If it's a pawpaw, we have 1 object. If it's a red bud, we have 12. Finally, the increment part, we're saying each time we loop, add 1 to this variable I. And then an open curly and a closed curly. Okay. Each time we loop, we're adding 1 to I. So each time we loop, we're accessing the next object in this JSON array here we're calling JSON plants. So I'll say JSON plants dot get JSON object, because we're getting an object out of this array, and I'm going to pass it that counter variable I. Remember, each time we loop, I is going to be 1 greater than it was in the previous loop. So effectively what we're doing is in the first loop we're going to get 0, in the next loop we're going to get 1, and then the next 2, 3, 4, all the way up until we're finished. Okay, now from here we're going to say create a plant object. Let me even say create an empty plant object. Okay, and I'll say plant this plant, sure. Actually, now let me go ahead and say plant with a lowercase p equals new plant. Okay, now we're going to say populate our new plant by using the JSON object that we have retrieved in this iteration. I know that falls a little bit off the screen. Okay, Okay, I'm going to say, ooh, you know what? I missed something. Up here, I need to assign this to a new local variable. Assign a new local variable. There we go. JSON object, we're going to call it JSON plant. Equals, there we go. Now what we're going to do is say JSON plant dot get, and what we can do is pass it in a name. What name do we pass in? Let's go back here again. If we pass in the name ID on the first item, we'll get back 701. If we pass in the name ID on the second item, we'll get 1893. If we pass in the name genus, we'll get Abutylon. If we pass in the name species, we get Hybridum. So name that we're passing in is this value to the left of the colon. Okay, so JSON plant get ID. And actually, I'm wondering, we might want to do something special here. 1 second. Get int ID. I'm going to tell it I want to get it as an integer. Okay. Control 1. Assign to new local variable. Int ID equals JSON plant get ID. Now, okay, we'll say plant dot set ID. ID. There we go. Just moving from one object to the other. JSON plant dot get. Let's see if we can do get string genus. Okay, again, where do I get genus? Right here. The value to the left of the colon. Okay. Control 1. Assign to new local variable string genus. Okay. Plant dot set genus. Whoops. Plant dot set genus. Boom. Genus. Okay, and we'll do this for the rest of our values. Not too many left, actually. JSON plant dot get string. Since we're getting the hang of it, I'll go a little bit faster. Species. Okay. Terminate with a semicolon. Control 1. Assign a new local variable. String species equals, boom, plant dot set species, species, terminate with a semicolon. String, well, okay, let's do it this way. JSON plant get string cultivar. Control 1, assign to new local variable cultivar. There we go, just like so. Okay, plant dot set cultivar. Cultivar. Okay, make sure genus, species, cultivar, and we add common as well. Okay, JSON plant get string common. Assign a new local variable and common. Okay, plant dot set common. Common. There we go, like so. So at this point, what we're doing is we're simply parsing out this JSON result and saving it into a plant. Next, we simply have to add that plant to this collection called all plants, and believe it or not, we already return all plants, so at that point, we're pretty much done. Add this newly populated plant to the collection of plants. All plants dot add plant, boom, done. Okay, and save. It's really all we have to do. So what I'm going to do now, we already have some breakpoints set. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this in the debugger, and let's watch what happens. Okay, right click, debug as, oops, I hit the wrong one. Okay, good. Right click, debug as, Android application. And if you haven't figured out already, once you get an emulator up and running, leave it running. It's going to make it much easier to make future deployments. Choose OK, and there we go. Okay, it's going to take just a moment to load, and then we'll take a look. Okay, and the emulator's up. So I'll go to Search Plants. And we'll give it a moment. Okay, now I actually need to put in real data. Let's go ahead and put in Redbud. By the way, there's that little, ooh, and I need to put it in. See, that's the funny thing is that now that I have to put in real data, I want to make sure my capitalization, although capitalization probably won't matter on that exact search. So redbud, and I'm going to choose search. Now our breakpoint should start hitting. What we should see is that it's going to assemble a URL. Sure enough, here's our breakpoint. Okay. It's going to, well, right now it's just in the plant result screen. It's starting to paint this screen. Okay. And now what we're doing is we're in that background thread, which is interesting. Remember, if you remember in the prior video, I was talking about why we thread. We thread to put something into a different process. So here's our user interface, and it's now active. We're here in a different thread trying to go fetch data, which is a fairly expensive process for the processor and also for the network. I hope that wasn't fatal. Okay, so I'm going in here, I'm creating my connection to the DAO, and then I'm going to tell the DAO that I want to search on the search parameter. If I put my mouse bar over, we see that the search parameter is the word redbud. I choose F5 to step in, and now what we see is it's going to assemble this URL. By the way, URL, URI, a URL is a type of URI. For our purposes, we can use those two words interchangeably. I'm going to go ahead and select this URL, and just so we can see what we're going to expect to be getting, I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to paste that URL directly in here, and let's take a look. We should get back JSON data, and there's the JSON data. If we want to inspect it, Control-C, and I'm going to put it into our parser, and Control-A, boom, Control-V, viewer, and here we go. We see there are, this is exactly what our application is about to get back. So I go back now, and I'm going to say, okay, call the network DAO. I'll choose F5 to step into this. And now we're going to say request this URI. It's literally going to run out to the network right now, and it's going to get this result. This is the time where it's actually doing that network call. This is where it will slow down a little bit. Mouse over result, and we see, here we go. Let's had to be a little quick on that, a little quick on the trigger there. Let me move this up so we can get a better look at it. Mouse over result and take a look at what we have. There's our JSON data. Now we just need help parsing it out. So again, right now I'm in the network DAO. You take a look up here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the plant DAO. We're going to go back to the method that called us. Back to the plant DAO. We're going to create our JSON object. From the JSON object, we're going to request the collection called plants. Again, what is plants? It's this collection of plant objects. Okay, so far no exceptions, so far I'm pretty happy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over each plant. We're going to get it as a JSON object. We're going to construct a new plant object, a new empty plant object. And let me Control M because we're going to be in this one for a while. And then as I step, we're simply taking data out of the JSON, putting it into the plant. Easy as that. Moving data from JSON to our plant object. This JSON object that we see here, that has all the smarts to know how to parse all of the symbols we saw in JSON. The open curly, closed curly, all of those symbols. And then we add that to our collection of plants. So notice we did that for the very first plant. Now we're going through and doing that for the second plant. Okay, I'm going to Control M. What we can do is we can look in the debugger, look in the variables tab, and you see there's this thing called all plants. What you're going to see, this is the array that we're going to return. Right now it has one plant in it. See that? That's because we've only looped one time. Right now we're in our second loop. So as I continue to choose F6, what we'll see is we're going to populate the second value in this array. Okay, there'll be a few more F6s as I continue to loop. Okay, now watch. It's populating our second plant, it's adding that to the array, which means this is going to change from null to plant. And there we go, there's our plant. If I expand this, we're going to see it's going to have details about this Appalachian red plant. We can continue through this. To be honest with you, from here, it's going to keep doing this until it finally returns this collection of plants. So I'm going to choose play, and then I'm going to go back to the emulator and let's watch what happens. Look at that. Live data. Live data. See that? So now instead of having dummy data, we're actually getting live data back, and we're returning that live data. And even better, I can click on one of these. Did I set that up yet? Yeah, I'd set that up. I can click on one of these, and it's going to take me back to the plant. It'll take me in and let me, I'm going to disconnect from the debugger now. It's going to take me into that plant detail page on the plantplaces.com website by going through this web view. So if we give it a moment here, what it will do is it will render, there we go, it will render this red bud in a little web view here. If I did everything right, so keep my fingers crossed here. Almost did everything right. It looks like my web view is pulling up the wrong plant, but that should be pretty easy to fix. But there we go. Now let me go back. I have the debugger disconnected, so we can go a little faster now. I'm going to hit search plants. Okay, again, the debugger's disconnected. I can enter any plant. Let's say I want to look for a pine tree. I'm going to put in pine. I'm going to hit search and watch. We're going to get live data back. Okay, it'll take a second because it's going across the network now. And again, on a real device, this is much faster. Take a look. Mexican white pine. Large leaf lupine. So this is getting anything with the word pine in it. Pinus flexilis, limber pine, Bosnian pine, Korean pine. Okay, there we go. Again, I can go back, I can put in anything I want, and each time it's going to go fetch live data. Okay, I put in, we'll do our old friend maple. We know that one's going to return a lot of results, and then I hit search. So this one will return about 50 results. And here we go. Flowering maple, trident maple, field maple, hornbeam maple. We know that this is no longer the dummy data that I had before. Not too bad. So a quick review. What did we need to do to get this to work? In Android version 4 and greater, if we're going to do any network activity, we must create a thread. So in a previous lecture, we created this plant search task, which extends a sync task. Do in background is the stuff we're doing on the background thread, which includes making this initial network call to fetch plants that meet this search parameter. We pass that search parameter into our plant DAO, which we also made on a previous recording. This plant DAO is going to assemble a URL, and it's going to jump down to a network DAO, or data access object. We're going to take that network DAO, we're going to tell it we want this URL. Network DAO, using some Apache libraries, is going to return a string result. The result is that big JSON string that we're dealing with. We pass the JSON string into a JSON object. We know it's going to have an array called plants, and how do we know that? We looked at the online JSON viewer that showed this is an array called plants, and it has 12 elements in this case. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use a for loop. When we start the for loop, it's going to create a variable named I of type int, initialize it to 0. Each time we loop, we're going to add 1 to I, and we're going to continue to loop as long as I is less than the number of plants that we have. Each time we loop, we're going to advance to the next plant in the collection. We're also going to create a new empty plant object here. Then we're going to simply move data from JSON into our plant. From JSON into our plant, from JSON into our plant, from JSON into our plant, from JSON into our plant. Finally, when we have a populated plant, we're going to add it to a collection called all plants. We define that collection at the very start of this method. We said this collection will hold plant objects. We return those plant objects. Where do we return them? We return them back to the plant search task within the plant results activity. That's going to hand it off from this background process into the on-post execute process, which is where it's going to marry back up to the user interface. Once it marries back up to the user interface, boom, we got our plant results on the screen. So what did we need? We needed threading, we needed networking, and we needed JSON. Add all those together and we get a very powerful network-enabled mobile app. So, hope you enjoyed this. That should pretty much wrap us up for JSON. As always, if you have questions, concerns, comments, or criticisms, please let me know, and I will be happy to address them. Thank you.